Welcome to the Knowledge for Men show. Your life will never be the same.
Your level of success will seldom exceed your level of personal development.
I want to die empty of regret. I want to die empty of my best work. We don't understand who we are. Instead, we're living out somebody else's narrative.
What one man can do, another man can do. If it's been done, it can be done again.
Being yourself and being your truest, most authentic self in every moment. If it scares you or makes you a little afraid, do it. Follow your heart and your gut.
The first stage, I think, is finding you, like finding out who I am today.
Stuff will not work. You will have things that fail. Success is when you're a happy, fulfilled person. How do you define success?
It's your life, and you are the creator of the movie script that is your life story.
Attention, if you are a frustrated man who feels like he is not getting the results he wants in his life, health, wealth, relationships, and personal growth, then I've got a powerful free video training for you to help you become a strong, grounded man so you can unlock unlimited power in your life, business, and relationships. Go to kfmconfidence.com to get instant access to this training. Again, that's kfmconfidence.com. If you want a Cliff Notes version of the best material that I've learned after 300 interviews on this podcast about being a stronger, more powerful man, then it's all here at kfmconfidence.com. All right, guys, welcome to the show here. I am with Mike Bundrant. He's the founder of the INLP Center. He's also an NLP master practitioner and an INLP fellow trainer and retired psychotherapist. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Andrew. Great to be here.
All right, Mike, let's dive right in with a favorite success quote or a saying that you've lived by that's helped you on your journey.
Favorite saying, especially in the last few years, I don't know who to attribute it to. I know it's really common in engineering, and it's this: a well-defined problem seeks its own solution.
A well-defined problem seeks its own solution. Okay, and what does that mean to you? And then how has that helped you on your journey?
Well, what it means to me is it's a really practical application, which is if I'm stuck in a problem and answers aren't coming to me, then I don't understand the problem well enough, because when I do, solutions start to come. When you identify the source or the cause of a problem, ideas automatically start to come. We're natural problem solvers. So when I'm stuck or frustrated and I don't know how to solve a problem, then I stop looking for solutions because I don't even understand what I'm trying to solve. And I really try to define what the problem is, what's going on. And there's usually something I haven't considered, especially when it's about a problem within myself, right?
Okay. So let's throw out some common examples that you see a lot of men experience where they're trying to find a solution, they're struggling, but in reality, they haven't even defined what that problem is clearly enough to find a solution.
Right. So let's take the problem of you're in a relationship and you experience someone, your partner, as controlling.
Okay.
I went through this for a period with my wife. It's like, geez, she's just in my business and controlling. And, it's like, we want to get ready to go somewhere, to go out somewhere. And she's on me. Am I getting ready? And you shouldn't wear this and you can't wear that. And so on and so forth. Nag, right?
Right.
And it's really frustrating. And of course, the step one is to see it as her problem and then tell her to stop, right? And, that didn't work. And so I really started to think about what's the problem really? If it's a problem within me, what is it? And this speaks to the idea of psychological attachments, which is stuff that we're doing, often ways that we're seeing the world that invite the very things that we don't want. And if I were to look at that problem of my controlling wife as a problem that I'm inviting into my life, then I start to get different information, such as when I agree to go somewhere with her, I often complain about it. I often drag my feet. I often don't dress appropriately for the occasion. I give her signals that I don't really want to go, and she questions my commitment. That's one scenario. And so in that scenario, it would actually be very, very natural for her to question my commitment and then try to pin me down on it and be worried that I'm going to back out at the last second or what have you, or sabotage it in some way. And so she's coming after me going, hey, are you going to be ready on time? And da, 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 right? And so by virtue of my behavior, I'm encouraging. It makes all the sense in the world that someone would try to intervene and monitor me. And so what I'm doing in a funny kind of way, even though until I understood the problem, I was unwittingly seeking to be controlled by my wife by saying, hey, I'm going to behave in such a way that you feel totally motivated to try to control me. And so that's one example of it. As soon as I realized, okay, I don't like to be controlled, and the things that I'm doing are absolutely 100% giving her reasons to want to control me, the solution becomes obvious. If I don't want to be controlled, stop doing those things. Mm-hmm. And then when I'm not doing those things, I actually have firm ground to stand on to say, you can trust that I will handle my end of our agreement on our own, and you don't need to intervene. And with that evidence, she doesn't intervene. She doesn't care. What she wants is to know that I'm going to do what I said I was going to do. So in a funny kind of way, I'm seeking to be controlled. That's the problem. And the solutions become obvious, much more obvious with that understanding. So there's one example.
I see. And it also sounds like you're setting some boundaries too. Like, hey, I am going to take care of my end of the agreement here. I'm going to take care of myself here. I'm going to show up, and you don't need to overstep and come and peek around and tell me how I'm going to look, dress, speak, whatever it is, whatever is going on there.
Exactly. And it's really common in that scenario that the other people, they don't want to control us. They feel compelled to by virtue of our own behavior. And there's another boundary that could be said. It's like, well, if I don't really want to do something and I agree to it and then rebel against it, maybe I could draw that boundary much earlier and say, don't expect me to be there at the party that you want us to go to because I'm not going to go, rather than agreeing to it to avoid the conflict and then dragging my feet and sort of being controlled the whole way and rebelling against that control. A lot of us men are rebels, and we hate being controlled. We don't like authority and expectations and so forth of other people. But for the most part, being a rebel is a great way to invite others to control you. I mean, if you take, if I'm a manager and I've got 10 employees and 9 of them for the most part are cooperative and do their job, the 10th one is a rebel who has authority issues, which one am I going to end up intervening on the most?
Right.
Yeah. Monitoring, micromanaging. I'm giving the rebel the very thing that he hates, and the rebel is unwittingly seeking it. So one of the programs at the NLP Center is called the AHA Solution. I wrote a book about it. It's all about how we unwittingly seek the very things that we don't like. We don't see it, but some part of us is sort of driven toward it. And again, we don't see it.
We seek what we don't like.
We seek what we don't like. And, that's the end result. It's not like, let's say in the rebelliousness example, I genuinely don't like to be controlled. I react when I'm controlled. And that reaction and my rebelliousness invite more control. And so I am, in fact, if you look at the facts, and you can always see this about other people when you look at from the outside, well, if you don't want to be controlled, why don't you try cooperating, right? I mean, if people will leave you alone and just let you do your job. Believe me, they want to leave you alone. My wife wanted to leave me alone and just get ready and let's go on time and be dressed appropriately for the occasion. She didn't want to control me. And so but the end result is we invite people to do it in those cases by virtue of our behavior. So we have to wonder, is there some part of us that kind of likes it, that kind of wants it, that we're not aware of? Unconsciously, what's going on? Because consciously, I hate being controlled. And I probably could reason out things I could do that would help people relax and not feel like they have to control me. But unconsciously, maybe there's something else going on.
Is the control, does it feel like a loss of freedom when someone is implanting control on you or to anyone? Is it a human reaction to feel like, hey, I'm losing some of my freedom now. I must now rebel to show this person or this system or this society that I am going to exercise my freedom.
Yeah, there is an absolute, very strong and admirable case for rebelling against loss of freedom. So when you have a government, when you have an organization, a system, or any group of people, I mean, like say a cult or what have you, I mean, their agenda, if their agenda is to control, and that's obvious, and you're losing your freedom, to actually resist that and do something about it is one of the healthiest things you can do. It's very admirable. And what I'm talking about is something a little bit different. I'm talking about a very avoidable situation in which I'm feeling controlled. So if I'm the employee that's rebelling and doesn't basically want to do the things in my job that I agreed to do, and I find reasons not to do them, like my boss just reminded me that a report is due today, which is true, and I've agreed to do that report, but because he felt he had to remind me, screw him kind of thing, that's a very, very avoidable loss, a feeling of losing my freedom. In reality, I haven't lost any freedom. I had total freedom to make the agreement to do my job description at the time, and I did make that agreement. It's fair for my boss to expect me to deliver. It's fair for my wife to expect me to be ready on time and dressed appropriately to an event that I had the total and complete freedom to either go to or not go to. So that's a very different and unnecessary loss of freedom. It might feel the exact same, but in one case we walked into it, and in another case where someone has an agenda to control us and they are legitimately stealing our freedoms, we fight back against that, and it's really healthy. So,
and we're using work examples. I think this applies in family examples, could be parents, could be siblings. Also, I think, relationships as well. I think this applies in any sort of relationship with anyone, this sort of control and rebellious act to regain freedom.
Absolutely. It's sort of like I'm trying, I may justify it by saying I'm regaining my freedom, but it's freedom that I gave away in the first place. I set myself up for the situation and now I'm rebelling. And there's sort of several layers of twistedness in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it is really common.
Very common. So I've looked into some of your work, and you have these different traps that men tend to fall into. You have this control trap, the rejection trap, and the deprivation trap. I thought these really stuck out to me, and I thought men would really be interested in these. So can you share more about what these are and how we can overcome them?
Yeah, we've essentially been talking about the control trap for the last few minutes, and the trap is essentially it involves, as a man in a relationship, I'm giving my power away to my partner. And one way to do that is to be uncooperative. And again, when I say uncooperative, I don't mean cooperating means doing everything she says. I mean cooperating with the things in the relationship that you have agreed to do. And now she's nagging you about them. And the reasonable expectations in a relationship that we tend to rebel, that kind of control, for the most part, is avoidable. If I have a wife who's nagging me and I feel she's controlling me, what if I just step back and say, okay, I need to draw the line here, but the first thing I'm going to do is to make sure that I live for a week or a month or whatever, not a day, but a period of time where I am fully confident that she has no reason to nag me. I'm going to make sure I'm giving her no reason to nag me, so that after that point, if this nagging is just her trait and she's going to nag me no matter what, then I don't have to buy into it. I can really draw the line on that. That would be one approach to get out of the control trap. And there's lots of different ways that we can get into the control trap. We can get into the control trap by being undecisive, by being uncommitted. We can get into the control trap by avoiding conflict. Say, I don't want to fight with my wife, and so therefore
Not speaking up.
I'm not speaking up. Guess who's going to make the decision and have all the power in the relationship? She's in control. I may resent that, but I had an option, right?
Indecision, where maybe it's not a partner, but maybe you're just in indecision with maybe being in the relationship or leaving the relationship or at a job you don't like, or just stuck in limbo between you're living in maybe, and
you're living in maybe.
Right. Just, I think, is that indecision to me is a form of suffering where you're just like, you're constantly thinking about it, but you're not doing anything about it. There's a lot of anxiety and worry rather than just going, boom, I'm going to do this, and it might not work out, but I'm going to make a decision and I will deal with whatever consequences there are.
Exactly. I mean, maybe and anxiety go together because, one of the most difficult things for anyone to deal with is uncertainty.
Yeah.
And so if I'm not committing, and the people around me are also going to be anxious, and guess what? They're going to try to motivate me. The people around me who care are going to try to motivate me. And then I rebel against that motivation because you can't control me and so on and so forth. And then things just sort of go south from there. But absolutely not making a decision and living in that uncertainty is a control trap on a larger scale. It's basically saying, life, you control me. Let circumstances and fate and whatever happens control me without my imposing my own will, my own values, my own goals upon anything.
Yeah.
I'm helpless, basically.
Yes.
Is what that's saying. And a lot of people who have the control trap issue have, on a deeper level, a kind of an unresolved personal issue with helplessness. And it could be sort of bred into us as men in many, many different ways. Maybe we had parents who never let us make our own decisions and suffer the consequences. Maybe when we tried to assert ourselves, we got negative feedback consistently. I mean, there could be lots of stories, but there's some unresolved issue with helplessness that keeps playing out, and we end up making decisions, like the decision not to decide anything, that only fosters further helplessness and encourages other people to treat us as if we were helpless. And again, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, a vicious cycle, and all these kinds of things. These are what we call psychological attachments. There's some inner sense of maybe helplessness in the case of the control issue, the control trap. There's some unresolved attachment, unresolved issue with helplessness inside of us that we've got to get that handled so that we can take control rather than allowing it to continue just to play out in our lives and be a victim of it.
And these can go on for years or decades, living in uncertainty. We recently were doing a team meeting. We were talking about one of our coaching clients, and he expressed that he had been uncertain about his marriage for 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just living in a sort of almost as if they were just roommates for 15 years. And finally came to the conclusion, like, oh my gosh, it was as if he was it was like unconscious uncertainty. Like he wasn't really conscious that he was uncertain about it until through the coaching, he was able to discover that, wow, this is not a hell yeah. This has not been good. And I think that is perhaps to believe that one can do a sort of a life audit on their own life and looking at, okay, what am I certain or uncertain about? My job, my career, my health, my family, my hobbies, my social life, my friends, and change from uncertainty to certainty, because then at least you have some awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great idea. And to do a life audit in which you're really honest about the uncertainty, because our natural tendency as men, we don't want to appear necessarily uncertain,
Right.
right?
It
But
seems
it may
weak.
be
It
under the
seems weak.
surface, right? It seems weak. We
Seems
don't want
weak,
to be
and we're
weak.
men, and we don't
Right.
want to look weak. We want
Right.
to appear strong. We want to be gladiators. We want to be warriors.
Exactly. And, what happens though, you mentioned it could go on for 15 years. Well, not only can it, but it's more than likely that it will go on for a long time unless you recognize that it's a problem, unless you're honest about it, probe a little bit deeper, because we want to be able to have a choice about these things. But as long as we're not aware, we can't have a choice. I mean, we can't make choices about things which we're completely unaware of. But one of the things that's really tough about this is the uncertainty at a certain point becomes what's most familiar to you. And to the unconscious mind, familiarity is safety.
Yeah, comfort. Yeah,
comfort zone.
You're good
That
at
safety
it.
is primal stuff, right? It's the devil that and you can survive it, right? And if certainty and success and happiness are not familiar to me, well, they're foreign concepts to me. I'm not living in that space, and I haven't been for maybe as long as I can remember. Well, people in general, I like to say this: people will choose a familiar misery over a foreign happiness every time.
Can you say that again? I think that's a key point.
People will choose a familiar misery over a foreign happiness every time. Familiarity is really powerful. It's safe, it's comfortable, it's home. And nobody wants to be kicked out of their home because that's not safe. That's foreign.
Right.
But the problem is when something negative like uncertainty or helplessness or being controlled or being chronically rejected, when those things are familiar, we want to stick with them too. And so we keep setting ourselves up for them over and over and over again. And so you have to consciously become aware in one form or another that this is going on so that you can realize the choice that you're making. And it's almost like, in a strange sort of way, at that point, you really need to learn to tolerate happiness and success and personal power. You need to learn to tolerate those things because you need to get used to them, because they're kind of foreign concepts for you.
Why do we embrace comfort so much if we know that it's not going to help us get to that next level? It's not going to help us push for something greater, but it's really keeping us at bay. It's not bad in terms of something bad is going to happen to us. We're safe, we're comfortable, but why is it so difficult to really go into that foreign? Why would we embrace the comfort rather than the uncertainty of the foreign?
Well, if left on autopilot, we'll embrace what's comfortable as opposed to what's foreign, because if left on autopilot, the key driver is survival and safety, and not necessarily happiness and joy and fulfillment and so forth. When it comes right down to it, we're hardwired to survive first and foremost above anything else. And that's the number one priority. There's a couple of other interesting twists too, though, because you could say, well, you'll actually survive much better if you're happy and successful. You'll be more resourceful. You'll be able to adapt to situations better. You'll have more money, maybe safer in a lot of different ways.
Right.
But there's something about the familiarity too, which taps into that universal law of pleasure and pain. So the universal law of pleasure and pain says we move toward what's pleasurable and we move away from what's painful, right?
Right.
That one's pretty obvious. And so why wouldn't we just move out of the misery because it's not painful or because it's painful? Well, the interesting thing about that is, to the unconscious mind, familiarity is pleasure. What's safe and familiar and comfortable, these are synonyms to the unconscious mind for pleasure. And so while we wouldn't say, oh, you're just in your rut because you enjoy it there, you're like, gleeful about it, and that's where you get your pleasure. That's all about conscious pleasure. Consciously, you're not getting pleasure at it. Unconsciously, if that's what's familiar, then that's what is actually the more attractive option. And so the way that would play out is that I may consciously aspire to great things, but I will remain in conflict about them. I'll lack motivation. When I sort of get started on moving toward those great things, I may get scared, and so on and so forth. I'll sabotage my path because unconsciously it's all kind of wired together, familiarity and pleasure and so on and so forth. And that's a hard one for most of us to wrap our minds around, but there really are different levels of motivation within us. So many of our decisions, according to research, as much as 95% of our decisions are made unconsciously. We become aware of them only moments after the fact. We become aware of what we've decided to do and not at all the process that we went through while deciding. We become aware of what we decided to do moments after the decision is made, and we take action. Well, what are all the factors going on in that unconscious decision-making process? Consciously, we may not know at all, but there are factors there, and taking into account what's safe and familiar and comfortable is a huge motivator.
And so what I'm getting here is this autopilot, like nothing changes until we get off autopilot. And you also said, the unconscious mind is, it's going to move towards pleasure, survival, and safety. So then I think the question here is, how do we snap out of autopilot and go from unconscious to conscious? And then also following up, is this something that you have to do over and over again? Does your mind go back to autopilot and unconscious?
Yeah, those are great questions. So the process, there's a lot of processes that once you're off autopilot, you can use to begin to restructure your beliefs and so on and so forth. The biggest challenge is being aware, not just that you're on autopilot, but the direction that your autopilot is taking you, right? And that at some level, you prefer that direction. And you can say, you know what, Mike, you're crazy. Who prefers that direction? It's like, well, if you have someone that is been in a rut for 20 years, say, well, you've been in this rut for 20 years, and there is some part of you that prefers that. And at least in a sense of believing and experiencing that rut is safer and more familiar, more comfortable than the other options that appear not to be worth the risk, even given the upside. So you have a pattern of behavior over a long period of time, and there's some part of you that is determined to stay there, determined to seek more of that. And that's sort of the unfortunate reality. And the behaviors and the track record speaks for itself.
Right.
And so the first step is always the most profound and often the most difficult, which is don't just go into a technique to change this necessarily, because now you're utilizing a technique or whatever technology, whatever protocol you want, you're utilizing that technique to fight a deeply ingrained, almost primal pattern of behavior. The first step is just to be able to be 100% honest, going, I am sort of in this rut of misery in which I feel deprived or I feel controlled, I feel chronically rejected. And at some level, I am believing, I'm seeing this as the more attractive option. At some level, this feels more comfortable and right because it's familiar. And when you're there, now you've brought something that was deeply unconscious and made it conscious. And then you can start to go, what I often give clients and some of our students, what I call a truth affirmation. it doesn't sound necessarily positive, but when you're in this paradigm, you're going, we're looking for the truth here. We're looking to define the problem well so that it begins to seek its own solution. And so if I'm right in the beginning of this, I'm going, my gosh, this is bigger than me. I've never been able to change this pattern. I don't know what to do. You go, well, don't worry about all of that. First, let's just define the problem well and be 100% honest and aware of it. Because the first step is making what's unconscious conscious so that you can begin to have some sort of choice about it. So it's like, here I am in this rut of misery. I realize that at some level, I'm motivated to do things and avoid doing other things so that I stay in this rut. So now I'm going to go through a day or two or a week and just being honest about this motivation. And I'm going to discover all the choices that I make that keep me right here. And I'm just going to acknowledge it. I made this choice. I didn't do that thing on my to-do list because that leads to success. And I'm more comfortable being in my rut of failure because this is where I feel safe. So that's why I didn't do that thing. And some time being honest about that, inevitably, I've been through this process with a lot of people. Inevitably, what happens after some time doing that, you start to go, how long do I really need to stay here because it's familiar? Isn't there a way that other things that would make me happier could be familiar? And how did I get here? Where did I learn that this is where I belong? And who taught me that? And maybe you start to question some of that indoctrination. And then some people start to go, you know what? I realize why I've always done this and I'm avoiding the success because failure is more comfortable, but I'm actually going to take a step out of this and because I'm tired of that. I'm tired of that motivation and I'm going to do something different. So you start to get a little space from it. You start to disconnect a little bit from that familiar pattern. You start to see it more clearly and you start to free yourself of it over a period of time. And ultimately, when that process is successful, there comes a day when you realize, I haven't done that old thing in a long time. I mean, I don't know where it went, but I know I haven't done it in a long time. You literally become more comfortable in a more positive space.
Yeah, it becomes a habit, it sounds like right there.
You bet.
As you're talking, something that I do every morning where I have to switch from unconscious to conscious every morning is I take a cold shower in the morning, all the way cold. And my brain, I take clothes off and my brain, I'm cold and my brain just goes, oh, warm. My brain wants warm. And it just goes warm. And then I have to consciously take control and switch to cold. It's never this like, oh, just cold. Like even I've been doing this for years. I have to consciously really get my mindset together to dive in there in the morning when it's cold, whether it's raining, it's winter or summer, and switch to cold. And then I feel like that's an unconscious act to switch to warm. And then it's a conscious act to move it to, to keep it on the right.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And so that kind of conscious intervention is really necessary. I mean, if you were just purely on autopilot, you wouldn't switch it back to cold because that's something you want or need to do to get where you want to be for the day or whatever.
Yeah, just to jumpstart the day. Yeah,
just to jumpstart the day, and so that's actually a really concrete example of how to intervene, and that we need to intervene.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah. And so we've been talking a lot about the control trap. I think it's a big topic to talk about. Let's briefly go into the rejection trap. How men undermine themselves by unwittingly conjuring feelings of insecurity and rejection from different directions.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about a scenario. The underlying principle is still that principle of familiarity and being in that rut, and unconsciously we're seeking to maintain the status quo. So let's talk about an example of the rejection trap. Say I get invited to go to a party and I agree to go, and social get-togethers maybe kind of aren't my thing or what have you. I don't enjoy them. And as the evening gets closer, I start to get a little bit more nervous and anxious. And I'm thinking, geez, people aren't going to like me. and I'm not going to have a good time anyways. I can't connect with people. I don't have great communication skills. I'm not confident. And I force myself to go and walk into the party. And of course, I start to notice how other people are better than I am. Well, he's better dressed and he makes more money and she's got much better social skills. And look, she walked by me and didn't even acknowledge me. And people don't like me. I don't fit in and I'm not good enough, right? And so that leads to I'm going to be anxious, which I'm probably going to be more closed off. And people probably are going to be less comfortable around me and not be able to connect with me. And there's the, kind of how the evening goes. I leave the evening going, there's another example of how I don't fit in and I'm just kind of rejection material. And now my evening played out. While I'm going through that process, everything that I'm thinking and predicting and noticing in the room and so forth is all true to me. And a lot of it may be actually true. I may look at a guy and go, he does make more money. I mean, I know it as a fact, right? And so I've just sort of gone through this whole evening of rejection. Now, we look at the AHA solution principles that we're talking about, and we're going to suggest that unwittingly you completely set yourself up for that situation. In fact, you couldn't have done it better. And it's important to be really compassionate when we talk about this, but the idea is you couldn't have done it better if you had planned the whole thing out and said, I got invited to a party, I'm going to go. And my goal is to experience a state of rejection as many times as possible during that party. I mean, I couldn't have accomplished that goal more effectively if I had planned it out. And it's interesting, if we're in that rut of familiarity, I mean, let's say, here's one way to get in that rut. Let's say that I grew up and the people in my life that should have extended themselves toward me, supported me, loved me, taught me that I'm a good person, that didn't happen. By virtue of their behaviors and the way they treated me, I came to believe at some level that I'm not a good person, that I am rejection material. And, by the time that I become an adult, I've been in that rut for quite a long time. And so unconsciously, that rut's very familiar. In fact, I wouldn't know what to do if I were to suddenly start living in a space of connectivity and acceptance and admiration from other people, and just to be all out there that way actually seems very foreign and terrifying. And in many ways, because I've avoided that space, I actually may not have developed the interpersonal skills to really do well there. So for several reasons, unconsciously, I'm motivated to stay where I'm at. Just like the warm water thing for you, Andrew. It's like unconsciously there's this thing that sometimes goes warm, right? And so how am I setting myself up? Well, by virtue of the entire lens that I'm looking through. I agreed to go to the party, and the first thing I do is predict rejection in my mind. I'm going to go there, people aren't going to like me. I walk into the party, I've got this lens on that is a self-fulfilling prophecy for rejection. And so when I look around the room, the evidence that appears to me is that other people are better than me. I'm looking unconsciously, I'm scanning for evidence that I'm not wanted and that other people are better than I am. And those are the elements of what's observable that jump out at me. And so this guy makes more money. That may be a fact, but through that lens, because he makes more money, it means he's better and more desirable person than I am, and so on and so forth. So I'm wearing this lens that says you're rejection material, and it would almost be impossible to interpret whatever happens as acceptance. So someone may come up to me and say, Mike, it's so great to have you here. I'm glad you came, and let's go sit down and chat. And that's acceptance, and the person could really, really mean it. But in my mind, I'm going, you know what? It's just a pity conversation. that she's having. She doesn't really like me, or she's not really glad I'm here. She's probably like, oh gosh, I got to deal with Mike.
Yeah.
And so she's going out of her way to prove otherwise. There is a way to interpret almost anything, even the grandest success, as rejection if we're wearing that lens. And the challenge then is when we're wearing that lens to be aware of it and to be aware of the unconscious script that's driving it and keeping us in that space of, in that rut of rejection.
Yeah, we're looking for meaning, and if we're wearing the wrong lens, we're going to associate it with a perhaps negative meaning or a meaning that comes from scarcity. It makes me think about that exercise where right now, even for the listeners, if I say, hey, close your eyes and then look and find everything that is black. And you see, oh, there's black. And then I say, all right, close your eyes. And then now where's all the red stuff? And you can't see it. Like your mind is solely focused on black. And
exactly.
That's kind of how I'm relating to this rejection trap and how it could really make us feel rejected or put us in a bad state, when in actuality, that's not what's real. It's basically just what we're giving it meaning to. So now, briefly, for time's sake, if we could dive into the deprivation trap, I did want to cover it because I do think guys could get a ton of value from it. So what is it, and how can men overcome this?
Yeah, by self-deprivation, we mean things like a lack of meaning, a lack of fulfillment. Emotionally, my emotions may be numbed out. I may not feel them much at all. I don't necessarily feel a lot of pain, but I don't feel joy either. I may live for a period of time with a sense of purposelessness, kind of an emptiness on the inside. I don't really connect with other people, and so on and so forth. And sort of in that state of deprivation, some really interesting things happen. If you talk about sort of how popular it is to set goals, how popular it is an idea to discover your purpose in life. I find that setting goals, identifying goals, knowing what you want in various different situations, and even knowing your purpose, these are not necessarily complicated things to know. They're not rocket science. Over the course of a few hours, you could discover a really powerful purpose for yourself. But if you're in the deprivation trap, then you are unwittingly going to avoid things that create and give you meaning and fulfillment and so on and so forth. You're in that rut where inner emptiness and lack is what's familiar, and you're going to do things that continue to encourage that, and you're going to avoid things that would offer a sense of fulfillment, a sense of connection. For a lot of men, emotional unavailability is an issue. And so that could be part of control. It's like, okay, I'm emotionally unavailable, so my partner is constantly nagging me, what do I think and how do I feel and so on and so forth. But at the same time, emotional availability is not a complicated topic. It's not rocket science. It's more along the lines of how do I feel right now, and can I express that feeling, and hopefully in a mature way. So when I'm sad, I cry, and when I'm filled with joy and passion, I'm filled with joy and passion, and other people are going to relate and connect to me more, and so on and so forth. And so that's the self-deprivation trap. And so we might talk ourselves right out of fulfillment because we're more comfortable in that trap. And so I have, say, my wife, I'm going to sit down. She wants to know how I feel about something. And if I express that feeling, then it gives her an opportunity to connect to it. And if she's feeling a certain way, she can express her feelings. Now we're sort of sharing the same emotionally intimate space that is very fulfilling to do. But if I'm in a deprivation attachment or in the deprivation trap, then I'm going to talk myself out of expressing that feeling and say, you know what, it doesn't really matter. how I feel anyways. It doesn't change the facts, or whatever excuse I can think of in order to not go there. When it comes to discovering my life purpose, I may put a little time in on it or what have you and go, I'm just too confused. And you know what? I have to do what I have to do every day anyways. And so this whole idea of finding your passion and purpose, it's just not for me. And we justify staying where we are. That's a little bit about the deprivation trap.
All right. I think it's important for guys to get that, to understand what that is, because I think we do it to ourselves unknowingly. And just to be aware of that can help us really just take action and overcome it.
Absolutely. When I say to people, look at your behaviors and assume there's some motivation behind it. If you're doing a bunch of stuff or avoiding doing stuff that would really be good for you to do, there's some motivation behind that. You've got to get to the bottom of that motivation, because behaviors aren't random.
Yeah. And so now let's dive into the knowledge round. I just want to ask you a few last questions here, just kind of short, gut level responses from yourself, Mike. So are you ready for the knowledge round?
You bet.
Have you ever felt like you weren't the strong, grounded man that you know you're capable of becoming? Like there's something more inside of you, but you don't know how to get it out? Me too. Years ago, I was broke, sleeping on my brother's couch, and just got out of a serious breakup that left me on the floor for months. Now, I have a multiple six-figure business. I'm in the best shape of my life, have an abundant dating life, and live on the beach here in San Diego. I want you to break through too and create the life that you want. And because people kept asking me so many questions, I've created this free video training series on becoming a strong, grounded man so that you can have more freedom, love, and connection in your life. I'll also teach you how to build real backbone to boost your masculinity as a man so that you can have more respect, power, and confidence personally and professionally. Simply go to kfmconfidence.com to get this training. Again, that's kfmconfidence.com. Also, I share the #1 conversation that your father never had with you about women. That will be a major wake-up call for 90% of you and will improve the quality of your relationships forever. Go to kfmconfidence.com to get this free training today. Welcome to the Knowledge Round, where the guests will be asked rapid-fire questions to give the audience invaluable pieces of wisdom to help transform their lives. Starting in 3, 2, 1, showtime. First question here is, what advice would you give to someone who's feeling really lost and lacking a purpose?
To own the feeling lost. Don't expect to feel any other way, at least for the moment. You're feeling lost, and so you go, I am feeling completely lost. Let me just be lost and go into the lostness for a while so I can figure out what's going on. Don't resist it. Go there. Emotions and states, they process through through our system if we don't throw a wrench in the spokes of that process, right? Gut reaction, be lost, own that.
I like it. And what do you think is holding most men back from becoming stronger, grounded men today?
The lack of self-awareness. I really think, I think that's what holds most people back. It really goes back to that first quote I said, a well-defined problem seeks its own solution. I think we're in our infancy as a culture, or as a species, in terms of being able to define the problems psychologically that plague us. And so lack of self-awareness. And because sometimes they're so hard to define, or they actually require some training to define, we kind of give up and stop looking for what's going on.
Yeah. All right. And what would you say have been 3 of your most influential books, and why? And before you go in, just want to let the audience know, Mike Bundrant here has his own book, Your Achilles Heel. Achilles eel. All right.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, I see the book cover here. Discover and overcome the hidden cause of negative emotions, bad decisions, and self-sabotage. Improve your self-esteem. But go ahead. What have been 3 of your most influential books?
The Road Less Traveled, M. Scott Peck. I think that is it's a classic written in the 70s, but if anything, sort of lays the foundation for a personal development path. It's that book. It pulls no punches, and yet it's very intelligent and compassionately written about the absolute need for hard work and discipline, the need for love, and that if you work really, really hard in a state of love with his as a way of life, and then this thing called grace happens to you afterwards, which is basically to say, with the right mind and a lot of hard work, good things happen. And it's a really powerful book and written in a great way. So I'd say The Road Less Traveled. There's another book called Freedom from Self-Sabotage, written by a mentor of mine, Peter Michelson. And he has a website called Why We Suffer. So Peter sort of passed along to me knowledge of a thread in psychology that's been largely ignored, that was developed by a colleague of Sigmund Freud's and was really, really radical, especially at the time. And it never made it into the mainstream. And my book, Your Achilles' Heel, is based on that thread. Peter Michelson was my mentor for a period of time and have his blessing on the books I've written and programs I've created. He wrote a book called Freedom from Self-Sabotage that is a psychotherapist's perspective on this idea of self-sabotage. All these traps, the rejection, control, deprivation traps, they're self-sabotage. That's one way to define them. So I highly recommend that book as well. And then as far as a less philosophical, more technique, kind of tools-oriented book, then I would recommend a book called NLP, The Essential Guide by Tom Dotz. A lot of NLP books NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, have been written over the years. At the INLP Center, we train and certify people as NLP practitioners. NLP's been around for a long time, but finally somebody put together a really good book on NLP, because there hasn't really been one until now. It's called NLP, The Essential Guide. So that's the third one I'd recommend.
All right. Really good books. I'll be checking some of these out. And this next question here, Mike, is more of a scenario for you. So imagine you had 60 seconds with 25-year-old Mike. If you can envision right now where he's going to be at, or where he was at personally, professionally, even in his relationships, knowing what you now know today, what would you tell him to do, and what would you tell him not to do?
Okay, 60 seconds with 25-year-old Mike, knowing that he was going to be where I am today. Well, I would tell him, you're going to be okay. The anxieties you have about how things might not turn out in your life, and the desperation you feel about making things turn out, you're going to be okay. And then I would also tell him, what you're doing right now, feeling the need to prove yourself, feeling competitive and sort of crazy obsessed with getting yourself established in the world. At 25, that's really normal. And I know you think you're imbalanced. I know you think there's stuff wrong with you. I know you don't want to have to prove anything, but in your 20s, that's what you do. You establish yourself in the world, and you're proving to yourself, as well as other people who trust you, that you're a viable person in so many ways. So don't feel bad about having to prove anything. When you're 45, you'll feel you have less to prove. Right now, go prove it. You're doing well.
Yeah. Really good. Just letting that sink in. And so now, I mean, even if you have to summarize some of your main points in this interview here, what would you say is your philosophy on success in life?
Well, it's similar to a lot of philosophies on success, which is it's forward moving, it's goal and solution oriented. Everyone's an individual. It's really important to discover your purpose and set your goals, discover your values, and carve out your place in the world that's really meaningful to you. And the piece that I would add to the mix, which I think isn't talked about enough, is you're going to encounter problems, and that's inevitable. And thinking positively is not going to just make the problems vanish. And when you do encounter problems, the problems you can't solve, those problems are being caused by things that haven't occurred to you yet. And you really got to open your mind to some stuff you've never considered before, like, hey, at some level, I'm seeking this. At some level, I'm creating this stuff that's making me miserable. And at some level, it's attractive to me, even though that's never occurred to me before. But some part of me is like into this stuff and thinks it's the way to go. So when it comes to the inevitable problems, both within and without, if the solutions aren't obvious, then the cause of the problem is something that you haven't considered before. Don't be afraid to get radical about what might be causing a problem. Don't have an ego invested in that, because if you really, really want deep solutions, you got to go into areas that seem counterintuitive.
Yeah, I like that. That's great. And so now, Mike, what's exciting you today? What's really getting you out of bed in the morning?
Well, at the INLP Center, what excites me every single day is that I get to do what I love, which is teach this stuff. We have students in 63 countries around the world. We're an online NLP training center. We certify NLP practitioners. We certify life coaches. We have a sales training at a different site. We're in the middle of designing a hypnosis certification training and sort of always developing new programs. And we have a very engaging community. So we have online learning, but it's really blended learning, which, we have online classes that people attend and get virtual coaching demonstrations and instruction and so on and so forth. And it's really made this technology and these tools available to people who it wouldn't have been available to before. So it's a dream come true for me. Teaching NLP and psychotherapy I've been doing that since I was 25 years old, and I'm 49 years old now. I never get tired of it, and now I'm able to do it in a way that has a really broad reach.
That's great. Yeah. And for the listeners, you can follow up with Mike and his work at inlpcenter.org, and also check out his book, Your Achilles Eel, like the sea animal, eel, or you can type in Mike Bundrant and it pops right up in Amazon. Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing some invaluable lessons here with my community.
You bet. Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you for listening to the Knowledge for Men podcast. Hundreds of interviews and millions of downloads later, we're continuing to build an international movement, and we're just getting started. So if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and leave a helpful review in iTunes, because it really helps the podcast grow so we can impact even more men in the world who need this. Guys, this is all about living with purpose, where every day you only do things that matter to you. You wake up, live with purpose, and take massive action towards the life you want. And always remember, love the life you have while creating the life of your dreams. Go to kfmfree.com to get a surprise bonus I've made for my listeners. Again, that's kfmfree.com for something that's changed my life, and I'm offering it to you for free. Also, check out my Amazon best-selling books that I've written for you to help you crush life at kfmauthor.com. Again, that's kfmauthor.com to see all the books I've created to help you break through in life. This is your host, Andrew Farabee, founder of KnowledgeForMen.com, and I'll see you in the next episode.